so I'm going to start. I'm both moderating the session as well as the lead for the operational challenges table. So I will start. And okay, so first off, I want to say about when our team met yesterday with operational challenges, we pretty much hit or touched on every of the roundtable discussion topics. And in the opening session today, although it was called capacity building, a lot of the same topics we brought up as well. And I took copious notes, so I've made those available to Carrie, so they will be available to everybody else as well. So I'll run down the list very quickly, and then I'll move it on, okay? So we talked about skills and lack thereof, so not enough skills in meteorology and hydrology to actually execute operations. We talked about data standards with respect to the weather observation networks, different brands coming in, different data types, and the ability to have interoperable data was a challenge. We talked about, as we heard this morning, lack of funding for maintenance once the weather stations were set in place. How do we maintain them and keep them operational for the years to come? We also talked about power outages and the potential of looking at other ways to communicate when power was an issue. We talked about fragmented projects funding, and we heard a little bit about that today when funding was awarded and maybe not all those stakeholders needed were involved in the implementation of the proposal, and therefore the funding wasn't enough to execute on the process. And then the other piece was on tenders, where it was spread over too many different groups, or in some cases grouped into one bucket, and then very much a difficulty in gaining access to those dollars. So that's a lot of, we actually came up with a few solutions with each, which we'll share with you later, not now. We're all too tired to hear about all of those, but we will have a discussion about that. So next up, who had the financial challenges? Okay.
Yes, it's a challenge. Finance is a challenge, absolutely. And when we started yesterday for the first time, our conclusion directly was, go on, guess about financing. We were only with two on the table. All the other tables were full, completely full, including, for instance, a public-private partnership. I mean, why are you there if you still haven't realized your financing? So start with financing. And I understand perfectly well, and that has been our conclusion also, because the other thing what we noticed yesterday sitting around that table is there was no one of the finance sector. No bank, no African Development Bank. Luckily this afternoon they were there, but not yesterday. So our conclusion again was finance. Getting finance for a project is very complicated. It is a long way, a very long way, and we draw the conclusion that if Mr. Gutierrez, the Secretary General of the UN, says that by the end of 2027, all countries need to have an early warning system, then we think, that was the conclusion we draw, but that was a conclusion initially we draw with only 3 people, was that by the end of 2027, some countries will have financing. And if you talk about really complex systems, for instance, modeling, radars, visualization, dissemination, it's not only a radar company or a modeling company that can do that, but it's also a telecom company who needs to take care of sufficient network. It needs to be assuring that you have sufficient electricity that you can run your system, so it's much more. So those projects take at least 5 years, so that means by the end of 2032, maybe half of all the countries will have an early warning system. So that was the first conclusion we draw, mainly also the most important conclusion. One was also that the national hydrological meteorological agencies or services in countries are not valued at their level sufficiently. There are countries where the NHMS is part of the navigation service provider, and the navigation service provider is part of the Department of Defense. So that means that if there is a budget for the Ministry of Defense, then it's divided and divided and divided, and all the story of the director of the NHMS is not coming upward sufficiently. We think that there is a task for the Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization, Celeste Saulo, to get all the national hydrological meteorological services that location, that position in a country that is necessary to fulfill also the requirement of the UN to have a early warning system in place. And the last thing, and luckily this afternoon when we had more people around the table, and in fact it was all maybe a bit confirmation of what we said yesterday also. Yes, there is money involved, and if you look, for instance, to how much money is involved, if half of the say 80 countries all need a project with an average of 30 million over 5 years, then it's 6 million a year. You talk about 5 billion for a year, for the first year. The turnover, well, I checked this morning for the World Bank only, I'm talking only about the World Bank, was last year what they issued in grants and the loans was 76 billion. So it's less than 10%, maybe even 7%. So if United Nations, World Meteorological Organization say that early warning systems are very important, then maybe they have to do a bit more to help to get financing, to help get the projects worked out.
Okay. Should we engage with the audience or should we just open up?
I'll go through them and then we can.
Okay. Next up is capacity building and development.
Thank you. My name is Jan Barani, and my name is Jan Barani, and I won't repeat a lot of the stuff you said already about capacity building because it's a central issue throughout the whole world, not just Africa. But some of the things that we did discuss that were important was that impact-based forecasting takes time to implement, and it takes time to train the people to actually work for the Met Office and the Hydrological Office to work with the Disasters Office to identify the potential impacts of the natural disasters so that you can create the warning system for the right people at the right time. So you don't just disseminate information that as you all know, it's going to rain a lot, 50 millimeters, what does that mean? Nothing, right? People that settle in the dry river basin that's been dry for 10 years, it's been dry for 10 years. You don't see any danger if there's going to be rain, but suddenly they get flooded out and you have thousands dead. So, so there needs to be focus on departments and institutions actually within each country working together to implement an impact-based forecasting. That was one of the things that we went over. The other thing is to prioritize hazards in each, not only country, but in each area. South Africa is a great example, right? You have the dry part, you have the wet part, you have different climates and different hazards. Mozambique, as we heard, is the supermarket for natural disasters, so they have to do everything. So this is one of those things we went over. Then another thing we talked about was that there needs to be structure in place in this country and only one authority to issue warnings. If you get into a situation where, let's say, the hydrological service or the weather service can issue warnings, you may get a chaotic situation where they're not working together to properly inform the people. And also, sometimes what happens is that, let's say, the natural disaster service gets funding for an early warning system, but they don't want to share the budget with the Met Office or the hydrological office because they got the money, and you have double working down in each department, each agency is building their own early warning system, and they're not working together because there's no way to share finances, or they don't really want to because finances are, as we heard, very hard to come by. And then the other important thing we heard today already was that with training, best building, training, and accountability after the training is performed, as to that the people that receive the training go back to their countries, back to their offices, and actually do something with the training or disseminate the information to their colleagues. And there was, talk about having certificates for participation, which is, as we all know, a certificate that ends up in the drawer. Then you have a certificate for participation, and then you have a certificate for competency, right? And so there needs to be, this needs to take place to implement this, but also there should be maybe case studies that you need to do after participating in the course to get the certificate, so that the information is actually used, that you learn, that the money is not just wasted on somebody going to the course and nothing ever happens to it, and so that so the money spent by WMO and the World Bank for these courses gets actually used properly to move the departments forward. So those are the basics kind of really good over.
Next up, we have data.
Sorry, I think I can speak loud enough. I think people could hear me. It's okay. So we had quite a robust conversation about data. I would say there was kind of many different opinions about how use of data is very, very important for everybody. And that we kind of skirted around that area. What was really the crux of what we discussed is data sharing, and then how could that work? And actually, in the real world, whilst we all understand that, we have access to lots of tools, devices where we're recording data, actually the reality of the situation means that even data across borders, whilst it would be great, actually isn't happening. And actually, there are many reasons for that. And a couple of people actually mentioned, even data sharing within countries, whether that be hydrological, meteorological, those data are not even shared. So the fact that whilst we could agree that actually having a common pool of data, whether that be, can we validate it? Can we ensure that it is actually correct? Can we regard it? Can we record it? Can we get it in real time? All of these things we kind of talked about. Actually, the crux really came down to where can we get it from and how can we access it? And actually, should it be a free-for-all? And if it should be free, at what grade of data? Should that be data recorded for every month? Maybe that's free. But then maybe every week or every day would be an additional cost. But there was also another kind of difference of opinion about, we had a gentleman from WMO as well, who actually say that even though the decisions are made right at the top, that data should be given and shared amongst all countries, actually, when everybody comes back home, well, maybe we've forgotten that discussion of my data's here, okay? And it's a very, very delicate situation, but even when we talked about, some countries that were actually giving data, even that became quite wandering for them to actually say, do we give out that data? We have it here, do we give it out? And if we give it out, is that going to be used for research, which is beneficial to everybody? Or is that being used by a commercial organization that they're going to make revenue against that? And if that's being done and used revenue against that, well, generally it's the government department, and your guys' constituents' money and everybody paying for that, then why doesn't that come back into the government agency? The government agencies there are being looked at what we would call more of a profit centre, i.e. trying to improve revenue so that can be re-spent in the department as opposed to being what we would say like a cost centre, i.e. being given free for all. So this conversation went on, and whilst we could all agree as human beings that actually data for all should be great, we should be able to share it. In fact, actually the reality is that that's not going to happen. And actually maybe there is somewhere in between, and I think after an hour and 20 minutes, we kind of discussed that actually probably that was where we would kind of level it, but whilst we agree that it should be on the deal, in reality, it's not actually ever going to happen. And whilst even a couple of governments that could give out, that is giving out data, that even they're sharing those concerns that it would be used by corporations that could even discount the credibility of the people where they provide that data. So there was just a lot of discussion. I must admit, for me, it was kind of quite interesting to hear it, but this real world discussion is much more above my pay grade, I think, but actually taking it up from a much more higher level, because each split down it as the continent of Africa, there's challenges, whether that be financial, which we talked about earlier, but then also civil unrest, data for everybody, actually getting it from somebody's device right the way down to the end user. How does that happen? Because that's where decisions can be made, and even though right the way down to individual people, there was no real consensus, other than that it would be a difficult situation. Anyone who was sat with me, I can see a couple of people that want to add to that, please. Okay. No, okay. So, I mean, we agreed that if we can give data away, great, but maybe if it is for a commercial organisation, maybe that needs to be charged for. And actually finding out if it's a research paper, great, fantastic, if that's for the betterment of the country or the region, or an explanation, but then where do you start developing a board of people that decide, yes, you can have it, no, you can't, what level of granularity? So that was what our discussion was.
Okay. Next up, we have public and private partnership.
I don't think I will.
Right.
Yeah, for sure, yeah, for sure. So hi, my name is Michael. I represent the company Design Design Technologies from Slovakia, and we had a roundtable discussion about private-public partnerships. I'm gonna go through the points that I made, but I think that almost each and every point was already discussed or mentioned by somebody here from the panel. So sustainability, maintenance, that was the major issue that people were talking about. At the table, it was really hard to understand each and every one of my respective partners at the table, because room was a little bit loud still, but yeah, the things that you mentioned, that operational budgets are not in place, investment budgets are there, but the operational budgets to maintain and to sustain the existing network is one of the biggest challenges that the Met services face. They have the skill tech guys, of course. Yeah, very few of them, getting fewer and fewer. And also one of the challenges in some Met services, such as Madagascar, is that they cannot basically accept cash or generate profit from the services that they can offer to private entities. So the way that a good example and a good solution that was proposed from Madagascar is, if they cannot accept or generate profit, they can go around it and basically maybe get paid by equipment. So laptops, as promised with the telecommunications, the telecommunication services, yeah, so they build the towers on your land, and in return, they provide the equipment with laptops, SIM cards and stuff like that, so that's basically a short-term solution, yeah, but on the long-term solution, there's basically most of the time, there's no legal framework in most of the countries, how to generate the profit, how to generate that, and be at least partially financially independent in that sense, yeah. So as a good example, I gave from our country, from Slovakia, we have a med service that can provide additional pinpoint forecast for private entities. For example, when they organize huge festivals, music festivals, so they can do the pinpoint forecast, and of course they charge it, yeah. Another one is when they generate third-party certificates, calibration certificates for that purposes, they can get the charge as well. So there needs to be a willingness, not only from the med services, but specifically from government entities, to do the legal groundwork basically for the med services in order to provide those services, and also define the needs of the end user in their respective countries, and then therefore provide those additional services. I don't know if I've summed it up good enough. I think that Soel helped me with with generating the notes. So that's basically the solution. Solution should be to budget needs to be funded on a regular basis, and not just just the investment funds. Yeah. So that's basically it.
Okay, in our last roundtable, environmental sustainable hydromet observing systems.
Quite a mouthful, isn't it? We've heard, I think, everyone talk about the problem of sustainable observation systems, right? So we haven't got sustainable observation systems. Who's thinking of environmentally sustainable observation systems? The reality is almost nobody. It was only a year ago this came up at the WMO level. Sustainability has been pushed to the WMO for decades, thankfully. But environmental sustainability, understanding the environmental impact of observation networks, has only become a topic in the last year or so. So very new. It's a challenging one. It wasn't of a lot of interest, I'll be honest. I started off with a good redemption in the private sector, but a very good representation from my salary and from a service provider. And then thankfully I had my friends James and Chris, I think James over there, join me and give some really positive examples of what's happening in Zimbabwe and in Zambia, which actually really encouraged me after a rather negative conversation with the private sector. So first, the key issues we observed, initially observation divided for providing climate services. So not having observation networks is not an option. Cost is the big challenge, right? It's obviously a challenge to finance systems in the start, but having them being more environmentally sustainable makes it even more costly. I mean, tenders are driven by price. It's going to be very difficult for anyone to acquire that system. Then another major issue identified is duplication. So I think we heard this in a lot of areas. I know of many countries where there's an ag network right next to a weather network. They don't share the data, there's duplication, and that is a waste and completely unnecessary. Comes down to lack of planning. So potential solutions, rather than focus on project investments on new networks, we should be doing more to recover investments. There's been millions, there's been billions spent over the last several decades on hardware that's rotting around the world. I don't hear any talk of trying to recover that investment. All these systems can be fixed. The radars are a hell of a lot of money. They should have a 20 to 25 year life cycle. So even though they've gone into disrepair, some of the money from early ones for all should be focused on recovering investment, not just buying new hardware. And that will also be much more environmentally friendly. Engagement with the private sector. So at the end of the day, the systems are coming from the private sector at the end of the day. Two ways to get the private sector to move: regulation and financial incentives. That's how we win. That's what drives businesses at the end of the day. There's a great example of radio songs. So in every country in the world is sending up songs every day. I've learned in the last 24 hours that a lot of those are going up with lithium batteries. And there's maybe 3 or 4 countries in the world that are trying to recover those lithium batteries. So thousands of lithium batteries being scattered around the world every day.
there's things we could do there. If there's an incentive from the WMO to push to an environmental sustainable solution there, the private sector would have it within months, within a year. The technology exists. Defining systems, we've talked a lot about life cycle of systems. There should be a definition there. It's not down to individual Met services to go and understand how long should my radio network operate, how should I maintain my AWS network. Many Met services have been doing this around the world. The WMO can help in it. They should be defining standards for different types of network, your radar, your piping, your AWS, what kind of investments needed to keep it running, what to think about. That again would help to do more sustainable solutions. Planning is a really important one as well, not just in terms of sharing between different agencies, but also on spatial planning. There's times where we put in wonderful networks and then we go and try and build infrastructure around them, and the observation networks don't work anymore. So good planning at national government level will help. So now a couple of positive examples. So from Zambia, there's a great example of collaboration here between government agencies, deploying stations, actually where they work with the private sector even. So helping the private sector acquire networks and then working with the Met Service where to deploy, how to use them. This doesn't happen in many countries, but really encouraging for me. Zimbabwe as well. They work as an advisor and procurement for acquiring all the networks for the ag industry, for the water authority. It's channeled through the Met Service, and there are some positive examples out there for us. What else do we have? Oh, probably my last one here would be consumer involvement. So it's not just about private sector and public sector. We've got a great example in my company where we have a 900 station weather station network managed by operators, weather geeks who want to participate. They've got a safe space for the station, they provide power, they provide pumps, and they do the first line of maintenance, which is spiders' webs, it's leaves, it's insects. That's the first challenge that leaves us native out, right? So it's a great model, it's something that we can replicate a lot. I don't think it's done much today, but it's something we can do a lot more with. So I think the way the names are on that environmentally sustainable observation networks.
Okay. So the last bit, one community, find out what folks would like to suggest for next year, what worked, what didn't work. If anybody is interested in offering up some ideas. Maybe I thought I saw a hand raised, but one thing I will say, okay, first, one thing I will say, personally, it is very wonderful to be here, but there's a lot of passion here. There's a lot of challenges, but there's also a lot of good use cases, a lot of things that are working. And I had suggested to Carrington, maybe a working group could be surrounded, maybe even on the topics, the roundtable topics or something like that. I would certainly be willing to participate, as well as assist on bringing any expertise from Esri to help engage with the community, especially on capacity building, on the training side, that sort of thing. So I know we were all talking earlier on in the week about statements of intent. Just it might be a little scary for some, but I'm just going to throw it out. But I've enjoyed these 3 days so much. I'm pretty excited to stay engaged with this group. And so I had suggested the working group. We have another suggestion potential.
Thank you very much for me. I just wanted to comment on the discussion we had. In terms of standards, we mentioned about standards. WMO through the INFO, the Infrastructure Commission, with a number of standing committees, we will issue these standards. So I encourage you, as you develop your solutions, consult these documents and say that whatever solution you are developing, they comply to the WMO standards. I visited a few of them sites there, and I found some of them they are ISO certified. I know when you are ISO certified, you comply to these standards. So it's important for that to make sure that we have accurate data, because The accuracy of data, sometimes inaccuracy, depends on these solutions.
Absolutely.
Yes, to make sure that the solution that you are developing is a solution that can help us in this era of changing climate. And another issue for the public-private engagement, I think we need to support members at national level to come up with legislations and policies that can guide this partnership. If we have that, then it will be very easy at national level. Thank you.
Do we have anybody else? Oh, yes.
Yeah, just maybe a small point about sharing the data between the countries and also sharing maybe with the regional organizations. The incentive is very important. That what is the incentive for each country to share the data? This project will bring you like 10 hydrometeorological stations, bring you X, Y, whatever. So what is the incentive? That is always an important question. We need to answer that question very enough before we request the countries maybe to share their data. Thank you.
Yeah, perhaps building case studies that can demonstrate that. It's exactly like Landsat, for example, was put in the air and for so many years you have to pay for it. Once they demonstrated, once they made it available to all, and they demonstrated the downstream economic benefits, then other countries followed, making their satellite data available.
Yeah, thank you. I started the public-private partnership too, and I remember towards the end, there was also a need or an agreed need to have some sort of a guide on public-private engagement. If there would be some sort of a guide, and I think if I'm not wrong, it was mentioned that South Africa Weather Service is working on one or so that will be shared. So we just hoping for that. And maybe for the future, something that was also mentioned, should be yesterday, or not only yesterday, they reach the last mile issues. It's like we are having advanced technologies, generating data. But when you want to go to the last mile of things, you have to start getting the technology, which by SMS or USSD. So I just wanted maybe to be one area to think about in the future, because everything becomes important when it reaches the real edge. Thank you.
Okay.
Just a few words, coming from my previous former experience within Metro France, I will, from what we heard, I would urge Met Services, wherever, but including for even more here, to move from data and basic information to services. Whatever your level of infrastructure, whatever your level of skills, etc., you have to do that. It's not so costly, and you need some tools. You need to change everything within your team. It's not so easy. And if you don't do it, be sure that some other will do it. Coming from the global actors are able to do a lot, whatever it is for general public, for business oriented, but including for public duty. So just do it, and it's not so difficult to do, but it's a question of willingness.
Yeah. Okay.
To respond on the incentive of sharing data. According to W Unified Data Policy, we have a free and a restricted sharing of hydrometeorological data. And the incentive for that is improved forecast for your early warning, because the data you're sharing is important for the numerical weather prediction. And the numerical weather prediction will predict data at your national level. The more you share, the more the accuracy of your forecast. So that is the incentive on the free and restricted sharing of data, because climate and event disasters, they know no political boundaries. So you need to share data and get from others so that you have improved focus. And this is the importance of the unified data policy and restricting. And that is the big incentive for your country, saving lives and property. If we are not sharing, then your forecast is not as accurate as required, because you are not getting from others and you are not sharing yours with them and with others. So we encourage this sharing of data. But one mention here about commercial services. You add value and you provide your services to commercial sectors. Of course, they need to pay. Like you give your services to aviation sector. Of course, they pay, yes. But just your data for improved focus is not a share. And they sent you with that, what I said.
Just a little, not gonna worry. I was just gonna say, I mean, you summed it up very beautifully. Okay, the idea of what does it mean by sharing data? It means can mean saving them, right? And whilst the ideal perspective, right, from the WMO, as you said, is that everybody shares the data for the betterment of everybody. The reality was what was the robust part of the discussion yesterday. And that while there are some Media France, and I know that our friend over in Botswana as well also mentioned that there's a lot of data being given out into the market, that we want everybody to filter. And even like I said, WMO was actually sitting there and said exactly the same as you. That whilst everybody sits there and says, this is what should be done, and the reason why, exactly as you said, unfortunately, the reality as much as we would like it to. And that is extremely unfair.
Sorry, my name is Robert. It sounds when we talk about data, actually, the first thing that comes to mind about ISO standards. I was wondering about whether or not you're giving consideration to citizen science, data collected by citizen science, what the value of citizen data, and how that's actually mainstream.
As a weather station manufacturer, and I think, I forget who was mentioned about innovation and opening up the sector to more innovation regarding weather stations and data. I would like to point out one little thing that kind of has been irritating me for a while. There's a shift towards 1 minute data from 10-minute data in all the requirements. Yet in Europe, maybe it's acceptable because you have internet and you have high connectivity everywhere. But this is everywhere I hear is cell phone connectivity, internet is an issue, especially in the field of the weather stations. Also, what is the benefit of 1 minute data when in one day, the whole data set becomes minimum, maximum, average temperature, standard deviation? The sensors themselves have usually a 10-minute thermal inertia, the response time. So if you're taking 1 minute data from 10-minute response sensors, you're averaging the average. And so we get to a point where some requirements make sense somewhere, but not everywhere. And these working groups, a lot of times they tend to, are biased towards their own experiences. But here, from what I hear, these requirements need to be tailored towards the realities of life of these meteorological networks in the country or in the region where they're being implemented. So yes, ISO is a good standard, yes, but in the end, from experience, I can tell you, you go to Europe anywhere, you pay $1,000, you get an ISO paper. Anywhere in Europe. ISO certification is that simple. So, papers, you know, can only go so far. There needs to be an intercomparison. There's actually it's called, I forget the name right now, but there's a working group in Italy who's doing intercomparison of sensors to standardize also the accuracy of sensors, which hasn't been done before because looking at specs of weather stations across the globe, you sometimes take $100 weather station specification, take a $10,000 weather station specification, and the €100 or $100 weather station has better specifications than the $10,000 one. How can that be? And this happens all the time in the industry. Actually, it's not just this industry, but the whole point is that let's take the specifications and the recommendations that are in all the WO documents and take what's practical and use that, and take what's applicable and use that in your, your region. Otherwise, you end up with $100,000 weather stations everywhere that after 2 years are not working because you don't have internet, you don't have this, you don't have this, you don't have this. So there does need to be a whole new look at how standardization is done and how things work as far as promoting innovation and technical innovation, which is usually outside of the current standards which are developed. So it's just something to think about, that it's not just about standards, but the standards need to be tailored to the actual real conditions. Realistically, thank you.
Okay, want to wrap it up?
Since anything else.
Just say, oh, more, let's keep it coming.
Okay, I am Yombo Balthazar from Cameroon. We worked on the public-private partnership, and we discovered something that was troubling. Many governments create duplicates to the Department of Meteorology or the weather services, and those other organizations or institutions, they perform the same duties that the weather services perform. At the end of the day, when the weather services want to meet with any private company to partner and progress with weather activities, it becomes very difficult because at times the other institutions have gone ahead. And this creates a conflicting environment. So we thought that WMO, which regulates all national weather services, could step in and work with the governments so that we redress this activity. We cannot have one country that performs two different meteorological activities. It's unacceptable, and it shows a problem of coordination. So we're suggesting that WMO should see into this, because many countries in Africa suffer this fate, especially when it comes to institutions that work on climate change policy. They have a conflict of what they do, and they don't have any permanent representation at the level of the World Meteorological Organization. So that is what we think that should be done at the level of the public-private partnership. Thank you.
Any more suggestions? No, okay. All right, gonna do a survey after the event?
Yes, I was literally going to say that. Is there anything else you want to say? Otherwise I could take over.
Oh,
Of course. I'm not coming out the front though. This is my first year with the mic. Last year I wouldn't even do the mic. This is a wrap. This is everything. I wanted to say thank you to everybody who's helped us up to the run up of the